Hey, thanks for checking out the video. If you all like it, please like and subscribe, and hope you all enjoy it. Have a great rest of the day.
It was probably like 3 guys, you know, that was it. But in the 18th century, you would have had about 10 per and you would have the assistant surveyor or the assistant surveyor, depending on what they were, because usually he had 4 teams. So you had the surveyor, and he had 3 assistants. So they would each head a team, and then so they were the ones in charge of the compass and making sure the bearings are right and keeping the records. If you were fancy enough, you had a recorder who would walk around with a journal and make the notes. But most of the surveyors did it themselves. They just carried that journal, and at night they would formalize it a little bit better. This was just field notes. Anyway, so you had the surveyor with the compass, and then you had the chainmen, and there's 2 of them, and one would start off where that pin is. They were the
leapfroggers.
Yeah, they would kneel down, and the other one would go out there 66 foot, which chains are. It all works out for the acreage and mileage and all that stuff.
1/8 of a mile for a ring.
Yeah, and so he would go out there, pull it as tight as he could, and then the surveyor's looking through those holes there, and he would say, you know, to the left, 1 foot, 2 foot, whatever. And the farther away you get, the harder it gets you. But it's amazing. We've done some stuff up there on the hill. You can see that chain just like, because it's tight. It's like this rod. It doesn't wiggle. It just goes click, and it's there. You know, maybe you might see this much of it, and you go take a half step, and it just and it's easy to see. And then he would shout, "Pin it," and that's where these pins would come in. There's 11 pins in a set. One there, and then 10. And at the 10th pin, the guy would make a sign or something.
Well, they used white flags and red for the 10th.
Yeah. And so they just, going back 18th century, they would just use red pins. And they used to sometimes use wood pins. They would cut them in the woods. They just cut sticks. But fancy people have these forged rings, and so or forged pins. And so after the 10th one, then the whole crew would move forward. And as you picked up the pins. And when you got to the end, 2 things happened. One, they handed off pins to the front guy, and then the surveyor or the recorder or whoever wore a leather strap that had these leather circles on them, you know, and numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They had 10 of those, and he would take one of those and maybe put it up here or put it down here, or however he personally did it. And so it was tens of tens. Yeah. It all worked out, you know, math wise. And so that's what's going on here. Now, up yonder, we're up to 2 to 4 axemen using filling axes to clear the brush. Now, I think this is not it, but if you look right straight through there, you know, that's kind of what it was like. I mean, it was brush and big rhododendrons up in the mountains, or even north of here, and all these trees that were much taller than these trees. And so they wouldn't cut the big trees, they'd cut smaller trees, and what they were trying to do is about a 10-foot path through the brush in the woods, throwing it to either side. And they would try to clear, and every once in a while they would look back, and like I said, they're way up there, because this crew right here is moving fairly quick. It takes me much longer to explain it to them to do. All right.
Yep.
And so they were up there probably about where those tents are, maybe even a little bit farther, clearing this brush. Like I said, 4 guys clearing. And every once in a while they look back and they might see, you know, go this way a little bit or go that way a little bit, because they're just looking backwards and saying, yeah, it looks about right. So then that's the 4. So there's 3 here, 4 there. That's 7, maybe 8 if you have a recorder. And then you'd have anywhere 1 or 2 scouts out to the flanks, the sides, and maybe up forward, checking out for natives, hunting, that kind of stuff. Because these guys didn't do it. How they would do, for the most part, what we understand is they would set up like a base camp, much like we've got here behind us, tarp, and they'd have barrels of flour and all that kind of stuff, and, you know, supplies. and then they would go. Maybe one would go that way, and 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 maybe. And they'd say, when you run out of supplies, or you've done X number of miles, come back and we'll compare notes, you know. And so, and they had now that they're not just surveying for surveying, they actually have lists of people. So they would say, Joe Smith has 500 acres. So they would mark out that's Joe Smith's land, you know, and they go to the next one and say, okay, that's such and so's land. That's, you know, he has 1,000. Okay, we'll do 1,000. And but they're also scouting for themselves, because most surveyors had land. So they're saying, oh, I've got 2,000 acres. You know what? This is a pretty nice valley. I think I'll take this part. You know, I wouldn't. There's no river around here, so I wouldn't. But
but you would take from a river to a
yeah, or whatever. Yeah, you use a lot, and that's the old. If you ever heard meets and bounds, meets are the straits, the bounds are boundaries, bounds, and that's a creek, a river, a lake, whatever.
A ridge.
A ridge. I like to tell people, you know, that ridge here behind us, that is the dividing line between Virginia and Kentucky. So if you're at the top of that ridge, you actually can stand up between both states. Because that ridge, even though it's north, it actually runs northeast to southwest and goes down here to Cumberland, 10 miles away.
It was always interesting to hear how they did it and how much it had not changed.
No, it didn't change until the satellites came
because
in.
They had, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask about roads. How would people get access to these places after they've been surveyed?
Yeah, road builders came much later.
Yeah,
and they would use the lines that, for, like I said, the axemen are cutting a line through. Now that's a property line, but that's a lot of those old property lines became roads because they're 10 foot wide
already,
and they just widened them out. But there's two ways to get into Kentucky. Really two major ones. So the first one is you got yourself all set up at Fort Pitt, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And you came down the river. That was the most populous way. It was the easiest way because you just came down the river. The secondary was to get horse, mules, wagons, and you went through the Cumberland Gap, 10 miles from here. And this was a stop-off point. This is the actual spot, but it's that way, I think 7 miles, I think, is what Marcus told me. It's either that way or that way, 7 miles, where the actual fort was. I think it's that way. But this was a stop-off point. You stopped at Martin Station and you got supplies, you got your horses rested up, and then you went. Problem with going that way, you know, you're coming through the gaps here. I mean, until you get over the mountains, you're not going to get to the river systems, which are over here. So yeah, that's the process. And then at night you'd set up a lean-to or something, put your gear away, you set up the lean-to there, and then you just sleep out under the stars. You know, hopefully the Indians don't get you. You might have a horse with you, maybe, but most of the time they carried everything with them. But they might have taken a horse with them. Now, if you came down the river, you could bring a canoe and you could canoe scout, which is a canoe survey, which is you put everything in a canoe, and you just go down the river or creek or whatever. Because you're also somewhat map making. Now the other hard part is when you got to go up a mountain like over yonder, or not even a hill to a point. That hill's not bad. That's not really a big hill. It's just that's a nice grade of a hill. But how they would do it is they would stair step up the mountain. So the surveyor
right there.
Yeah, how they would do it, they would stair step up and stair step down. So let's just say this is a lot higher than it was supposed to be. So the surveyor's here, he'd be looking through there, and the guy would be walking up the mountain. Just pretend. He'd be walking up the mountain, okay? And that surveyor would be looking through there, and he would see the bottom of this, and he would say stop. And then they would measure that, and then he would move forward to this spot, and they'd do it again, and they just stare at 66. Well, not 66 foot. It was whatever that line was, and then they'd measure it, so they would have the line, and they do. This is 90 degrees right here. That is that measure, and you could do the math if you know that. If you do that kind of algebraic math, you could do those. You could figure out how far this is, and you knew that this was 6 foot or whatever, how many feet up, and you could because this is 10 chain links long. This isn't random. This is 10 of those, 10 of the chain links. Now each link is 7.62 inches. As strange as that is, it's 7.62 inches, but that equals out to 66 feet, you know, or 33, actually 33 or 66. And every length equals back to that 7.62. A mile is whatever a mile is. I never can remember. 5,000, whatever it is. 5,000 something. Anybody remember what a mile is?
5,280 feet.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'm trying to put that in my brain. So if you divide that out, it actually gets down to 66 feet, which equals down to 7.62 inches. But it's based on the old. See now, because we say tens, base 10, which is metric, which is a French invention. But we're working on the old acreage system, which is acre of land, 640 feet square. And so that is why they equal out. It all equals out to this 66 foot or 7.62 inches. That's how. Okay, so let's just say we're going along. We're having a grand old time, and we're following sort of a basic map like this, and we come across a river. Now, that river is pretty wide, right? How are we going to get a 66 foot chain across the river?
You can't.
You can't. And so if you get a basic map like this, they would say, well, and it says it's 423 feet. How did they know that? You know, well, the answer is they guessed. Okay, until the 1760s, two guys you may have heard of before, Mason and Dixon, surveying the border between Delaware and Maryland, and then Pennsylvania, Maryland, the Mason-Dixon line. They had to cross several large rivers, and they couldn't figure out. They were trying to figure how do you get, you know, without guessing it, how could you do that? Well, they remembered that in their gear they had a Hadley's octant. Hadley's octant, which was used to measure the sun height on shipboard, tell you where you were in the world. Well, the modern version is a sextant. Okay, Hadley's octant was 1/8 of a circle. The sextant is a 1/6 of a circle, because how many degrees in a circle? Anybody remember? 360. So it's easier to do 360 by sixes instead of eighths. Just how it works out. So that's why the moderns are sextants. But the old ways, they were octants like this one, and they were made of wood, usually teak. And this one's a little bit later version of one, because it's got all these extra bells and whistles on it. But anyway, they had an octant, and they realized that if you could measure angles, and we could determine certain lengths and certain angles using math and the triangular math, we could figure out the distance across that river. So here's what they did. They took two guys, each with a pole, and they sent them across the river with the chain. And one guy put his pole down. They measured out 2 chain lengths, 132 feet. 6666, 132 feet. The other guy would hold his pole as straight as possible to the other guy. And they would stand there, just like this. Now, across the river, they would not turn it this way, because they're not doing up and down this way. They're doing this way. So they would turn it sideways. They'd look through the viewfinder through this ocular right here. They'd line the guys up with those poles, and how they did that using this mirror, it would move back and forth, right? So you see that mirror moving on the top there? That mirror right there is moving, and so when you if you're looking through this and trying to line that guy up with this mirror, you line them up. I'm gonna use one of you guys there, about right there, and you would have that measurement. You lock it down, have that measurement, and so you knew that was 132 feet. This is a right angle, 90 degrees. And with that two things, you could work it out on a piece of paper or in your head if you were really smart, how far that was. You'd say, oh no, it's not 423 feet. it's 476 feet, or 0.2 or whatever. So they figured out how to do this. So that was easy to do. Rivers, lakes, anything bigger than 66 feet. A pond, they just want to, because you didn't want to have to go around the pond. You wanted to go straight across and keep going your straight lines. Now those are called meets. If you ever heard of the old meets and bounds, meets are these straight lines. Bounds are boundaries, or a stream, a river, a lake, a pond, whatever. Mostly streams. So then you would be the whole time you'd be taking field notes. You'd be taking all these just little notes. We return right at the big oak. Whatever that means. So at the campfire at night, when you're making your official notes, you would say something like, at this point is a big white oak. We turned right 90 degrees and went that way. And you're basically doing big squares if you can. Most of the time they didn't, because there's lots of streams and things. And they would, and they're calculating the whole time how much acreage they're having, because you might have 1,000 acres. Well, I'm not going to give you 1,001. I'm going to give you 1,000 acres, whatever that looks like. But you also have, now later on, you have the problem is you had to go back to the Capitol and look at the deed books and make sure that your surveys don't overlap with everyone else's. So you might have a thing where there's unsurveyed land, and that's along Colonel Johnson's farm, and there's unsurveyed land to the left. Well, there's where you started with Colonel Johnson's line, and actually the deeds would say along Colonel Johnson's line, which means his deed, his plot. And you'd say at the white oak, whatever, you turn left. Now here's the problem. We did all this work. We were out here for 6 months. We didn't get killed by the Shawnee. We were ready to go back, and we go back to Williamsburg. Well, we go back to Williamsburg, and the first stop we make after we clean up and rest a couple of days, so we go to the Surveyor General of the Commonwealth, or the colony, depending on what year you are. And you present him your ledger book with all the surveys, all your journals, everything. Now, if he was having a bad day, or he didn't like you, or he ate a bad oyster that morning, he would about say, I'm not going to approve these. And all your stuff was thrown out the window, basically. But if he approved them, then you had to walk down the street to the courthouse and stand in front of a magistrate and get your surveys certified. Once they're certified, they're put in the deed books, and you could write out your deeds. And then in the newspaper, you said, the survey team that went, last spring has returned. Come get your deeds at the Raleigh Tavern from October 1st to October 15th. And we would sit every day in the Raleigh Tavern and drink some coffee or some other beverage. And we would wait for someone to come in. And, Mr. Jones would come in and say, I'm Samuel Jones, and you surveyed 500, and we'd go through our deeds. And we'd say, yes, sir, here you go. So now you have a deed for property in Kentucky, but you live in Eastern Virginia. So that your job is now to start your own expedition to go in. Now, sir, you might be the father, which I'm sure assume you are, and you might leave everybody at home and say, I'm going to go see what it's like, because you don't have directions, you just have some markers. So you would go and you'd say, yeah, that's not too bad, So I'm gonna cut down some trees, and I'm gonna start to build a lean-to. You might have a tent with you. So you're gonna build a real rustic, not this nice. You're gonna build a real rustic house. Maybe a dirt floor, maybe only about 5 foot tall, and with a little loft, maybe a little fireplace. And then you're gonna either send for the family or you're gonna go get the family. But most of the time you're gonna send for them in some way, because you're not gonna want to leave your land because someone might steal it. And since you built a lean-to, they might definitely steal it because you've improved the property. So you're going to send for your family, and maybe in about a year they might come, and they might bring a wagon load of things, and maybe a brother came along with them or an uncle. And then you're going to live in that lean-to for a while until you clear the land, because you're probably going to be a farmer most of the time, and you're going to clear the land. Your job for pretty much a year is going to be cutting down trees every day, all day, with your eldest. He's old enough. How old are you, sir?
I'm 12.
You're old enough, yeah. My great-great-great-granddaddy was 9 when they came to the frontier, and they put him to work. He was in charge of the smaller brush and trees. Now, it was very dangerous. You had creatures that you had never seen before, heard from, snakes including. There were still panthers in these woods. There were still black bears, which there still are today. The eastern panther is pretty much gone. They're still around, but they're wildcats. You had bobcats and wildcats, and then you had the most dangerous creature of all, the Shawnee. And they didn't want you here, and they would come and get you. So you had to be careful. So you came armed. We even on our surveys, we carried rifles with us everywhere we went. And then you just became a farmer. You cleared the land, and maybe your neighbor wrote back to you and said, you know what? We've decided we don't want our 500 acres. If you know anybody that wants it, let us know. Well, you might say, well, we could be 1,000 acres, so we're going to buy it. And you'd make a deal, and maybe you buy 1,000. Maybe your neighbor north of you didn't want his 500. Well, now you've got 1,500, and on and on and on. You know, now what happened? You say, well, how come these families don't have these giant plots of land today? Well, they've divided them amongst their children. A lot happened a lot. If they had 4 boys, they would say each of them gets a quarter, so that you went from 2,000 to 500 each. And then, as life goes on, cities spring up. You just move on. You sell the land. And a lot of these frontier places, are buried under trees. No one even knows they were there now. It's because it's been 250 years or so. So that's surveying in a nutshell. Any questions, comments, snide remarks?
What's that machine used for?
This one? That's the compass. Come here and look at it. So, hold on. Let me pull it up. So see the compass, see the needle moving? Yes. It'll slow down. I've been moving it. So that'll point north, magnetic north. So we would use that for a bearing. Okay, what's called like say we're going that way. So we know that's north. So we're actually going to stay on 0 on this particular. We are always going to look through here and try to make that needle be 90 because we're going now. But that doesn't mean. We could be going that way. We could be going this way. It doesn't matter which way we're going. Now this is, for ease of words, we call this a surveyor's compass, but in the 18th century they called us a circumferator. Circumferator. It's hard to say, so we just say surveyor's compass. Now the old ones were, some of them were made of wood, some of them were all made of some brass ones. They have different kinds of looking through. This is a really nice one. This is a later 18th century one. Made in Philadelphia. His name is on it. James Davenport is actually on the dial. This is 225 years old, or a little bit more. And Dennis, our fearless leader, he has one that is dated 1750. So you're talking 275 years old. And it's still working condition, still points north. And like I said, I tell people that's magnetic north. So like last year, we've had the northern lights. And they were coming from that direction, but we knew that was north. And after many years of doing this, I know that's north. I just know that's north. Yeah.
If you have this big one, why do you need a little one?
That was just used for in like this little one. Mm-hmm. That was just used like on a map like that, or in camp when you're trying to know which way is which. That's just that's a personal one to carry around. You wouldn't set this up when you put this away. You put it away for the night. It has a travel box over here. Little travel box is locked up, and this all comes apart and it goes in this little travel box. And some of them, the wood ones, the basic wood ones, the box is only about that big. Once it's all, and everything comes apart and goes in it, and the plumb bob's on the side, it's just a little tiny. You would put it in a case, like a leather case, and put it on the side of the horse, or put it in your backpack. This is a hard thing to carry, the tripod. Sometimes they wouldn't use tripods. They would use what's called Jacob's staff, which is just a wooden staff with a metal point on the bottom and stick in the ground. That was sometimes easier to use, especially on the hills. And easier to carry because you can use it as a walking stick when you're moving. But a lot of them started carrying these. This particular one is a reproduction of an actual design, actual 18th century design. There's no metal in it. It's just all wood. Just a couple of even the pegs to hold the legs on are wood pegs. So yeah, metal iron rusts, unfortunately. And so I have one that actually has metal feet on it, metal pins on the bottom of it, but that's, again, a later design.
Okay. Children, do you know what Ian, I know you do, but do you other children know what this is? Okay, what's that used for? How does that help? Yeah, what else can you do? But what can you look? This line.
Place.
Yeah, it's so you can line it up right.
Yeah, it gives you. It doesn't necessarily give you level, but in the artillery service, they used to use it to do an angle. So they'd have a protractor with an angle thing, and they would hold this down on top of the artillery. Okay, so it's not going to move. It's going to move because of wind. But then they would have that protractor up on the barrel, and they would know what angle they were at. So the next time, if they wanted to move it a little bit, they would put this down, and they would move it up 5 degrees. So it's level, but it's also perpendicular. It's this way. So we used it to. This one's off center because I don't have a tie on down here. But this one is to basically try to line up with that pin because that's our starting pin. So you try, if it was in the middle here, we'd put it right against that, right up on this pin, like that. That's our starting point.
So on a surveying expedition, how many men usually went? Because obviously you
40, 50, 60.
Oh, okay.
So you have usually 4 teams of 10, the main men, but you also were hiring scouts along the way, so it could be more. Okay. Usually you hired your scouts from the back country. You didn't hire them in Williamsburg. They wouldn't know anything about living back here.
Right. But
you came on a station like this, and there's always men coming in and out. So you're hiring, say, hey, we because you'd stay here for a couple of weeks. You wouldn't come and go. You'd stay here to get supplies or to rest up because you just came from Williamsburg or wherever. So you've taken a while to get here.
Right. So you said a group would be about 10.
A team would be a team is 10. Yeah.
A large.
A survey expedition would be 40, 50 or more.
So a team, what are the while they're surveying? What is their job?
Okay, so the assistant. Well, so you'd have a lead surveyor, who was usually the expedition's captain or leader, and then he would hire 2 or 3 or 4 assistant surveyors. So they'd each take a team. Okay, so you'd have the surveyor. We'll just say the surveyor. He's actually the assistant, but that's so the surveyor was in charge of this right here. Okay, he was in charge of note taking, and he was in charge of this instrument and keeping on line. So he took notes. He was keeping in mind acreage and that because he had a little ledger that had things on it. So that's the surveyor. That's number 1. Number 2 and 3 are the chainmen. There's just 2 of them. One, and they're just big strong guys that can pull that chain super tight. So that's number 2 and 3. 4, 5, 6, and 7 were the axemen. As you see, we have axemen. Did you say axemen? No, chainmen. We don't say axemen. No. The axemen were 4 of them. They would have these big, broad filling axes, and they would be way up in advance, clearing about a 10-foot swath. Because if you look this way, that's kind of what the forest looked like. It's just brush and down trees and huge undergrowth of blackberry bushes, and so you'd want to clear that out. They wouldn't necessarily cut the trees down. They would just try to clear a path. Now, if there was one clearly in the way, they would cut it, but these are not this size trees. These are like this. Yeah. And sometimes they would come back and say, there's a giant tree in the way, and the surveyor might walk up there and say, oh, let's leave it, we'll just go around it. They'd measure around it and then use it usually as a corner. So that's the surveyor, the 2 chainmen, the 4 axemen, and then you had 2 or 3 or 4, usually 2 scouts, who were the backwoodsmen who were way out on the flanks, way over there, stalking, hunting game, checking it, make sure I would call them the security guys, making sure the Indians weren't going to attack you, which they did from time to time. So that's a team, and then they would like I said, they would have a certain time they would come back to the base camp. They would set up a base camp much like we have behind us, with supplies, and the cook would be there, and maybe the lead surveyor would stay, maybe a few others, maybe if they brought women, which was rare. There's very few instances where they talk about bringing women. They did from time to time, and they'd come back, clean up, rest up. They'd share their field notes, get their field notes all kind of together, and then maybe the next day they'd say, okay, we did that way, now we're going to go that way. You know, and they would stay out here. They'd leave about March, April. They'd leave Williamsburg, and they would make their way out here. They'd stop here for, who knows how long it took them to get out here, a month or so. They'd stop here for a week or two, get supplies, hire the scouts, and then they would go. And it took them a while to get to where they're going. They had an area, they kind of knew where they were going.
Right.
It was much easier to come down from the Ohio, the Pittsburgh side. So you'd make your way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Fort Pitt, which becomes Pittsburgh, and you'd get canoes and bateaus, big 25-foot boats with a sail on it, and you'd come down the Ohio River. And if you went far enough, you had to get over the falls of the Ohio at Louisville. And then you would turn up these broad rivers, the Kentucky River, the French Broad, all these rivers that you could turn up. And then again, you have your canoes. So then what would happen is the guys would set up base camp, and then they'd have two canoes, and they would go, maybe one would go that way, one would go that way. Remember, they saw another creek off the side, go up there to that creek and turn down, see what you see, and if they'd survey along the way. And now cartography is a whole other ball of wax. We're not cartographers. They had similar equipment, but they used a lot of transits.
Children, do you know what he means when he's saying that?
Cartography is making maps. So this map was made by a cartographer.
You want us to look at the map? Can you say that word? Say that word.
Cartography. So this is a map of eastern Virginia and into Kentucky. So this is a really old map. So up here is Pennsylvania, a little bit of New Jersey, part of New Jersey, and Delaware down here, and Maryland right through here, and then Virginia, Williamsburg's down here, and then down to North Carolina. And North Carolina came all the way over to the Pacific Ocean that way at that time, because there's no other states. Now where we're at today is along this ridge right here. There's a break. I found it just a minute ago. Now I've lost it. Virginia, North Carolina. It's down here. It's just down here. There's the line right there. So we're right in here. We're actually right in this area right here. Okay. Because they would come through the mountains to get over there. Okay. So yeah. So the cartographer is a guy that makes maps, and you know it's not very detailed. It is detailed here because this is where people were living at the time. But what's over here? Nothing. Some rivers, some hills that they've marked. Now, if this was a modern map, there'd be all kind of cities and towns because we've moved west.